Like, let's like not avoid the big thing. Previously, I discussed the possibility that if you were to see Trump escalate, he would have to, in order to send the regime into crisis, if they were willing to watch the regime spiral with no means for whatever takes its place to support itself without international assistance and investment to recover its oil and gas sector, he could start bombing the oil and gas sector as a whole. And they have done some of that in the area around major cities, as if to make the visual impression on the public through apocalyptic imagery that the war has come home, because they didn't really do a lot to sabotage the Iranian oil and gas industry. It actually did absolutely nothing to do that. If you were to track Iranian oil and gas shipping between February and the war started February 28th, right? That was when the bombs started falling. There has been a 30% increase in shipping of Iranian product since then. And they're making more money on that increased shipping because international prices are up. So up until today's operation, and including today, the Iranians are still making more money this month in energy profits than they were last month. So obviously, I thought, with all that considered, if they really wanted to escalate the situation, they would probably go after the oil and gas sector. Now, instead of going in a massive campaign across the country to destroy every single oil well, to destroy every single pump, to go after all the piping or all of the ports all across the coastline, it seems that the Trump administration is just going straight for Kharg Island and have bombed military installations there. Now, if you don't know where that is, one second, let me bring this up. Kharg Island is a small island off the coast of southern Iran. It was mostly like a trading port historically. That's not I'm sure they had some cool local culture, but if you were to look at where it played out in geopolitics up until very recently, this tiny little thing with a tiny little wildlife refuge and a population of less than 10,000 people, small local community. Before the Shah's government, this was just a trading port. That's what most European powers used it for. That's what it was useful for. Of course, fishermen and all that such, but it was just a tiny, tiny island. Then, during the reign of the Shah, in working with the U.S. government, they developed Kharg into a massive hub for the transportation of fuel. And since then, it has developed to the main passageway for 90% of Iranian crude. And so when you talk about going after the Iranian oil and gas sector, Kharg Island is the export hub for the oil and gas sector. It is off of Kharg Island as a hub that they are making more money this month than they were last month, off of higher oil prices and more product pushed. So if the American government wanted to bring the oil and gas sector to a halt immediately, without having to use a huge amount of munitions across a huge breadth of country, damaging tons and tons of infrastructure, probably a lot more a lot more work, probably a lot more danger for pilots, they could bomb the oil and gas infrastructure on Kharg Island. Now, that is the simplest way for the Trump administration to go about doing huge economic damage to the government of Iran. Now, there's a few reasons why that might not, number one, be a great idea, and number two, be what they end up ultimately doing. Number one difficulty with this is that the Iranian government has not used all of its munitions. It still has, according to a Pentagon, at least 1,000 missiles in its inventory. And while we've seen videos recently of launchers getting taken out in the launch position where they're starting to go up to begin the launch, and we still have reason to believe that they still have launchers. If we take the American government at their word, they have 1,000 missiles, even if they had a couple dozen launchers, they could still use that if concentrated to do significant damage. They also still have the Iranian drone program, an Iranian drone program that might not be as wide spanning, producing as much, and as effective as the Russian drone program, which is something that American military planners should consider when seeing how much damage the drone program has done in the region compared to what the Russians do and what the Iranians could do. But if they were to concentrate that at Aramco, Saudi Aramco, the biggest state oil producer, what would that mean for the oil and gas sector? They are very, very close. And you wouldn't just need the long-range missiles. Short-range missiles can work for places like Kuwait, which has a desalination plant that provides 90% of Kuwait's water. So if you go balls to the wall on the oil and gas sector, and by bombing Kharg Island, that's essentially the message that you will be sending. I want to send this government into financial freefall. I want to make it so there's no way for you to repair the damage that has been done. I want to make it so every single geopolitical objective you're trying to achieve, whether it be through funding of proxies, funding of the atomic program, funding of the ballistic missile program, generally trying to keep the Iranian people from rebelling against them in a wider way than has already been done. We're rejecting all of that. Well, then there's a chance that not only will the government decide it can go balls to the walls, but through its decentralized command structure, you could end up seeing some local military leaders who may be like, I've lost connection with command, XYZ, who knows what. Maybe they make a decision to fire. That's what the Iranian presidency said about the launches in Turkey and Azerbaijan. At least that was what was in between the lines, was that maybe a local military leader could have fired off. At least that seemed to be one of the more likely possibilities. Of course, they deny it, but I mean, it's pretty evident that there was a missile. It couldn't have come from nowhere, even if they didn't intend to do that, and to widen the negative reaction to the Iranian government after they fired on a whole host of nations that did not include America and Israel, but may have included American and Israeli military assets, bases, or otherwise cooperation. Oman was probably one of the wildest, though. Oman was probably one of the wildest. So I would say this is probably a bigger immediate crisis, not only for the American military bases that are closest for Iran, but I would say for the oil and gas assets of the region. Not only because it's a vulnerable target and it's going to be very difficult to guard everything, but also because it's a direct response. You go after our oil and gas resources, we're going to go after your oil and gas resources. You're going to send the market into tumble at our expense, well, we're going to send the market even further into tumble at your expense in an election year. Have fun with that. So there will be political connotations as to why the presidency might not want to do that, and as to why, as of right now, they've only hit military targets, which we could see from this announcement moments ago. At my direction, the United States Central Command executed one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East and totally obliterated every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Kharg Island. Crown jewel, Kharg Island. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known. But for reasons of decency, I have chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. It could also be because Iran is producing 4% of the world's supply, and if you were to take out that hub that provides 90%, 90% passageway, that is going to have an effect on markets, which are already sitting at, as I have last checked, 99.31, just under $100 a barrel. It's going to go over it again soon, especially as this continues. And bombing raids like this are not going to reinforce confidence. However, should Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will immediately reconsider this decision. They've already been doing that. They've already fired on multiple civilian shipping vessels. There's about 500, maybe like 600 now, who knows, shipping vessels immediately around the Horn of the Strait of Hormuz. And so I think there's not a high likelihood that the Iranian government is going to concede to all of Trump's demands. And so Trump might right now just be trying to get them to concede to the idea of allowing the Strait of Hormuz to pass freely, so the economic backlash of this operation is not as significant. The problem with that is that is the biggest card the Iranians have. And as they lose more and more longer range munitions in their reserves, which the Pentagon is reporting, that's only going to further encourage them to hold on to the leverage they do have in the Strait of Hormuz. And when you have a new Iranian Ayatollah whose father, mother, wife, and son have been killed by recent strikes, I do think he might have a tendency to lean towards digging his heels in. So I think that there's a decent chance that the Iranian government might be of the opinion, you want the Strait open, you have to sit down and negotiate. And Trump is of the opinion, I did not come here to negotiate the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. I came here to get concessions on choosing the next leadership, which I obviously did not get. Choosing that there would be no nuclear program in Iran, choosing the future of their ballistic missile program, which is non-existence, choosing Iran's future of proxy development, which is goodbye, right? He wanted to get concessions on all of this. But instead, there's now a negotiation as to, hey, well, maybe you stop the strikes, then we'll reopen the Strait. That's what the government wants to engage in. Instead, the Trump government's like, okay, well, if that's the state of affairs, they don't want to play a waiting game for months to see, who lasts out. They don't want to be like, 6 months from now, we're still dealing with all these economic problems. We're still dealing with the Strait. We're still dealing with a government that has not made concessions. So I said on yesterday's program that if he was going to go after Kharg Island, it would make the most sense to go after it right away. Because if you were going to go after it in a week or 2 weeks and kind of wait for things to develop, try not to, spook the markets right now, then the longer you wait, the closer it's going to be to the midterms. You chose to do this now. You thought it would go like Delcy Rodriguez, and it didn't. Did not go like Delcy Rodriguez. It looks a little bit bumpier. We heard 3 to 4 weeks, then it was 4 to 5 weeks. Then we heard something about 8 weeks from Pete. Then they said something about September maybe. And now even all the mainstream outlets are saying weeks and weeks are the likelihood. And so if they're going to do this, doing it sooner rather than later would be the move. And so they've decided sooner. But the reason they haven't gone after the oil and gas resources yet is if they go after the oil and gas resources and they don't just go after the military assets, then they can send it into spiral. And he does not want that. He does not want that 4% lossage on international markets. He does not want that loss of the low energy prices, which JD Vance, weirdly enough, was bragging about on the campaign trail today. I don't know if you guys saw this, but JD Vance was talking as if we didn't just watch gas prices go up nearly $1 in 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks.
All this conversation happens where Joe Biden left us in a terrible situation. And the reason why gas prices are where they are today is because of Donald Trump's work to get them lower, because in the Biden administration, they were crazy high. The gas prices we're seeing today are nothing like what we saw at the peak of the Biden administration because the president has set us up for energy dominance. And one of the lessons we all have to take away, frankly, every time we get involved in anything overseas, whether it's in the Middle East or anywhere else, the thing we got to take away from it is energy dominance and energy independence. Rely on our own people, rely on our own energy.
So I don't think they want to face the political reality of the price increase. I mean, 20% of the international supply comes from that strait. Iran provides 4%, right? If you disable 20% of the passageway, 20% of the world supply is frozen, then you also take out the Iranian supply that is still going through, the 4% that's still going through that area, because there are vessels going through the Strait of Hormuz. They're Iranian vessels that are going through the Strait of Hormuz. Then that is going to make it worse. But the idea from the Trump government might be, make it worse now, but then you can reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And while, it might mean a slightly higher price after this is all said and done, probably won't see a recovery until well after the midterms completely. At the end of the day, the Strait will be reopened. It won't be $110, $120, $150 a barrel, or the prices that some people are predicting right now. And you can get away from the crisis after the government has toppled. But if you were to pull the trigger, you still have to intensify the crisis. So go after the military objects, maybe make the Ayatollah concede. But for all the reasons we previously talked about, there is many reasons as to why they might not. Number one, there's the one retaliation aspect on the gas infrastructure, which is going to mean not only the 20% is out, but then you've got the 4% from Iran, of course. Their supply for the international supply is gone if you take out Kharg Island. They're going to respond, if they have the means to target gas infrastructure in all of these states, if they can. How much damage they're going to be able to do, I do not know, but they still have drones, they still have some missiles, and Saudi Aramco is rushing to the Ukrainians, trying to sign contracts to get Ukrainian drones defending their skies, defending their oil and gas infrastructure. So they seem to be taking the threat very, very seriously. Before we even talk about desalination plants in Kuwait, desalination plants in Saudi Arabia, desalination plants in the United Arab Emirates, or any of these places that either get between 40 to 90% of their clean water from the process of desalination, and that if you take out these desalination plants, especially in Kuwait, there's no immediate infrastructure to replace that. So these states in the region face more immediate risk than the American homeland. Of course, our bases in the region also face a risk, but if the Saudis wanted to cause a type of reciprocal economic and civilian damage to the region, desalination plants, oil and gas infrastructure, these are places that they can target. And if they have decent enough intelligence, then they will know what locations they can target to do the most damage, what components to do the most damage. They've already damaged a desalination plant before. I believe it was in Bahrain. I forget if it was Bahrain or Kuwait, but I believe it was Bahrain. If they damage it again, maybe they take it out of commission. That will be a crisis for that government there. And so there is also a fear that maybe you want to get them to concede instead of setting into this crisis, because what is that going to mean for American-Saudi relations? What is that going to mean for American-Kuwaiti relations if we engage in this type of air campaign and then we didn't have the means to protect their airspace when they retaliated against their states, and then they sent them into local crises? And there's a lot of governments around here who really fear getting overthrown by their own people. Monarchies, tend to be somewhat paranoid about their, the non-monarchs getting too involved in politics. The laborers getting ideas. Either way, there are responses that the Iranian government can give if the American government was to just go straight balls to the wall and take out this oil and gas infrastructure. And so I think the risk to Saudi, Kuwaiti, and all these other nations' supply, the Strait of Hormuz, the 4% in Iran, has led the Trump government to start with basically, I don't want to call it a warning shot because they likely, it was the largest air attack day of the entire war. And I've said that before, and I will likely have to say it again. And others have said it before and will likely have to say it again. And the reason why is it's true every time. More air assets are getting moved into the region every day. Every day. So I think that they wanted to avoid that outcome if possible, try to get the government to see that they are willing to take shots at Kharg Island, that they're willing to go further. Now, the question is, will it be an operation to just bomb it, when that could leave the next government in a worse financial position to recover? When that could mean if you got a friendly government in Iran, it might be one that lasts very little, doesn't last that long, assuming that it's a friendly government in Iran, assuming that it's going to stay a friendly government in Iran, and they're not immediately going to get overthrown. You're not immediately going to see a civil war develop, which could be a real problem for the war on terror that was launched over, 25 years ago now? Point is, there's a lot of reasons as for the stabilization of the next government, the potential responses to Saudi oil infrastructure, the potential responses to desalination plants, our relationship with nations in the region if we're unable to guard those assets, which is not 100% certain, especially since the Iranians still seem to retain some missiles. They still seem to retain a larger supply of drones. And if they can fire them off now and they have enough of them to do a bulked assault, that means a lot launched at a certain point in a moment of crisis, then the threat to this infrastructure still exists. And so I think that's all why Trump hasn't gone all out. He doesn't want that effect on the midterms if he doesn't need to, but he's going to do it now because if he does it later, then a month now is a closer date to the elections. Much closer. Simple as that. So, do I think Trump's going to go through with bombing the oil and gas infrastructure? If the Iranian government does not heed his demands or give sufficient concessions in his mind to make him able to sell this as a win and get away from these rising prices, then I think there's a good chance that he will, especially since he's already put the idea out there and this is not the first time he's considered it. The question will be, what will that mean for infrastructure throughout the whole region and oil and gas prices as a whole? Especially when at the same time, Donald Trump is having to lift sanctions on Russian oil in order to make up for international prices going up. And when he does it, it doesn't affect international prices, but it does affect Russia's ability to fund the war. That was really embarrassing, by the way, that he makes all this deliberation on whether he's going to remove the sanctions, he's not going to remove the sanctions. We see some removing of the restrictions on the shipping to India, and then we see the removing of sanctions on these ships that are at sea for Russian crude. And what does it do to prices? Has zero effect whatsoever. Doesn't move the line at all. So we weakened our position for a month. The Russians are going to get billions more, and we're still in the same exact position after dumping 172 million barrels from the global reserve and the International Energy Agency dropping 400 billion from 32 countries, not 400 billion, 400 million from 32 countries. I would not call that geopolitically competent. I would not call that geopolitically competent. So, here's my question. Will Trump instead consider something that could get him more leverage? And that is a military landing on Kharg Island. Now, this comes with immense, and I'm not saying this flippantly, this comes with immense risk. If you were to do a military landing on Kharg Island, you would have to fight the military personnel that is on the island. Because the idea that they've destroyed everything on the island completely and totally, I don't believe that to be the case. There is a possibility they can take it with minimal casualties or maybe no fatalities, but then holding the island when the Iranian government is right there and they can launch missiles, they can launch drones, short range, long range, anything that can get over this little gap. Anything that can get over this little gap, they're going to be firing at that island. And that is where I think the likelihood for American casualties increases if they have to hold the island for an extended period. And there's also the possibility where we're trying to get this asset, where we're trying to keep the infrastructure intact so that the Iranian government knows that we have leverage, we have an ability to unlock a lot of oil revenue for them that has now been locked down if we capture the island. There's also the risk that, we take it, they just bomb it. They bomb it. And they just make it, not useful. Now, of course, what does that mean for them long term? Maybe not that much. But at the end of the day, if American personnel are put in the line of fire and they decide for propaganda purposes or because they've already lost it to blow it up anyway, then every American fatality will seem superfluous. Will seem pointless because we could have just bombed it from the air. But if they instead make the choice that it isn't worth blowing up the oil and gas infrastructure, it might be worth targeting American personnel. American personnel might get hurt, but if the infrastructure stays intact because they want to keep it around, then America has leverage. Leverage that could come with American casualties, but leverage. And over 2,500 Marines have been moved into the area, an expeditionary force. Now, what the expeditionary force has been moved into the area for, whether it's just to send a signal, whether it is to add pressure to the threat on Kharg Island after they bomb these military targets, whether it is for a different operation entirely, and we're about to see some Marines grab some yellow cake, I do not know. But what I do know is that the Iranians are nervous about it. And I'm probably sure the Marines are just as nervous, if not more so. Probably. Well, I guess that depends who you are in Iran. So I think the more likely possibility is a bombing, but that also means that the larger leverage they could have is this economic key to get maybe not regime change, but regime compliance is lost. A regime compliance operation might be take Kharg Island, hold Kharg Island, offer Kharg Island in exchange for you have to give up A, B, or C. Atomic program, ballistic missile program, proxy program might ask for the whole shebang, but might leave the regime in place. The Delcy Rodriguez solution, where you still have the regime's brutality, you still have the same old guard in place, but now they're just more compliant with American national security interests. Now, you might hear Donald Trump on like Jake Paul's podcast talking about how this is, it's for the gays, which is a thing that he was saying apparently. I don't think that might I don't think that's going to be the main priority. I don't. No, really, he did say that.
I was a bit shocked too. Like everyone else in the world was like, "This is the greatest thing," and I think what you're doing is phenomenal. And I was shocked that so many activists like in America didn't like it, but meanwhile they're like, "Oh, well, we support women. We want women to have all these rights." Meanwhile, you're liberating the women of Iran, and then they have an issue with it. I thought that was very confusing.
We support gays, but they throw gays off the buildings,
Yeah,
okay? We support this. I mean, the things they do, and they're fighting. But I think I have tremendous support on this. This is something that's been incredible. I have the best poll numbers I've ever had now.
Yeah.
And it's not because of this. I think we've just, you know, the economy is great. It's a little bit of we take a little winding road for a little while, but we have to wipe out the evil. It's an evil curse. They're evil people.
Now, Trump was we'll stop the killing. You have to stop the killing. No more killing, or we're going to do something. Then he did nothing for weeks. Trump is, you got to, you know, kill the families of terror. Like, this is a guy that I don't think his first concern is going to be humanitarian. I think that's obvious. So the likelihood of Trump going for regime compliance before regime change, I think is very high. Honestly, I think he would prefer it. The problem is that the people who are at the top of the regime, you know, the Mushtaba is not very compliant. He's not very compliant whatsoever. And I think that this is the reason where we've gone from we're ahead of schedule, was what Trump was saying. The war is very complete, to, you know, I'll feel it in my bones when this is over.
I'm doing something about it. And I had to take an excursion. We had the greatest economy in history. We still do. Oh, this will bounce right back. When it's over, and I don't think it's going to be long, when it's over, this is going to bounce right back so fast.
When are you going to know when it's over?
When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
Will you ask anybody in particular? Would that be some of these a joint decision?
Well, I deal with people. I have great people.
Yeah.
See, if Trump goes after the oil and gas infrastructure, it's still going to take time for the regime to go down. They're making more money right now than they were making in February. They're probably aware of the possibility of their oil and gas infrastructure getting taken out. Now, of course, once that's taken out, a clock is ticking. Once you stop paying the IRGC, once they stop getting money, there's going to be a problem with keeping everybody necessarily in line. If long-term stability of the Islamic Revolution is threatened, different sectors of the IRGC might want to take more radical actions. Others might be looking for a way out the door. You don't know what the future could hold once there's not as much, you know, the pie is not as big as it used to be, and they're having to use other methods to get their fuel out to the international stage. Taking out this location, the infrastructure there, is going to be extremely damaging. There's no way to immediately replace all that infrastructure. They can try to get their product out through other methods, but that's going to take time, investment in other methods. And if they can get through this crisis, I'm sure they'll see this as a weakness for the government, and they might invest elsewhere. If they're wise to, if they see that that's a security need for them to do it and not a cost that they can avoid once they figure out after this that, hey, my God, there's a lot of stuff we gotta replace. There's a lot of stuff we gotta fix. My God, this is gonna take a lot of investment. That's something they can't afford to not invest in. But for now, we live in the here and now. They can't like go back and invest in all this other infrastructure. So for at least the time it would take for them to find other passageways, that's going to affect their state budget. That's going to affect their way to, you know, sustain the state. And that's going to be at the same time when the American government has shown its ability to completely, I mean, I don't want to say the word obliterate too much, but air defense systems in Iran have been obliterated. The fact that we see low-flying drones firing short-range missiles is enough proof of that. The fact that every shot-down aircraft that has been manned has been either taken out in fueling incidents or friendly fire incidents seems to indicate to me that all of the manned aircraft that's going over Iran has been able to operate and complete most of their missions. We even do have some reports of Iranian aircraft being taken out in air-to-air missions by the Israelis. So the American campaign on air at home in Iran will continue. It's continuing to intensify. I have no reason to believe that tomorrow's bombing is going to be a lot quieter than today's bombing. What I question is, if the Trump administration goes through with this, what's their reaction going to be once the Iranians respond in kind with whatever means they have left? And how will Trump supplement the markets then? Will it be now that the sanctions that have been removed from the Russians are going to stay from, because the way it worked is they said, you know what, it's just going to be a month. We're going to have sanctions off the Russians for just 1 month. Don't worry. If there's Russian crude stuck at sea because of these tricky sanctions, then they can go sell their product until April 11th. Well, if there's a lot of damage done to Saudi oil infrastructure, UAE oil infrastructure, Dubai, I mean, all these locations, Kuwait, if they do a bunch of damage to all of their oil and gas infrastructure, and the Iranian oil and gas infrastructure is also knocked out of world supply by these retaliatory strikes, then what will that mean for Trump keeping those sanctions off? I mean, we listened to the Trump administration, and they seem ecstatic at the idea of resuming trade with the Russians. I listened to Donald Trump talk about removing some sanctions from the Russians when they were considering it, and he said, maybe we'll remove them and maybe we'll keep them off, in the idea that hopefully Russia will make peace so we won't have to put them on again. But if he's so willing, when pulling the levers for trying to react to this, to a market crisis after a war of choice, a war of opportunity, whatever you want to call it, but a war that he certainly started, if he is reacting first by removing the pressures on trade to India, first by, I mean, not first, but I guess second, by removing the sanctions on Russian oil at sea, then why wouldn't third be extending those exemptions past April 11th? If there are large-scale retaliatory strikes, that means that the only way to really get it back under $100 a barrel is by working with one of the largest producers in the world, the Russian Federation, which up until now, we've been able to take up tons of their market share. But now, because of the, what we've created, I doubt the Europeans going to take up that share, but the Russians can trade elsewhere. And if we tell these locations, hey, in this crisis, you can take that product and you won't get sanctioned, a lot of countries will. And what does that mean? That means the Russians not only being able to sell what was previously sanctioned oil, making more money because of that reason, selling closer and closer to what was previously a price cap. On top of that, they'll be selling at a much higher price, which is currently roughly like $100 a barrel. This is the period at the start of the war where the Russian Federation was making money. They were not actually losing money when it came to the gas sector because of how high the price had actually gone up. And at that point, the sanctions had not tightened into much more of a vice grip. It's not completely a vice grip now, but it's certainly a sturdy grip. Trump has now loosened it. So in this crisis, if the Iranians respond, why wouldn't Trump's first instinct be, fuck, I got to sell somebody out? Well, you know who I'm choosing first? Let's go look at the country that just sent their drones to the region. Let's put sanctions relief for the country that's giving intelligence assistance to the nation that I'm trying to fight right now. And drone assistance, probably the most helpful, as in trying to help them figure out their strike campaign, help them with their drone development, when the Russians are now ahead of the Iranians when it comes to drone development. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people think the Shaheds in fucking Iran are the same Shaheds in Russia. And yeah, they have the original base design. If this was goddamn 5 years ago, but the Russians have had the battlefield of Ukraine to sharpen their designs. So the same experience that the Ukrainians traded with the United States to get those 10,000 American-made but Ukrainian battle-tested drones, interceptor drones, into the Middle East, why can't they do the same thing for the Iranians, not only in the short term, but in the long term? And when people talk to me trying to justify this operation, I always hear about the long term. Always hear about the long term. Maybe that's because it's not very clear what the president's interests are or objectives are in the short term. I'm mispronouncing the English language. In the short term. My goodness. And look, it's not just President Trump, it's the people around them that I think would be the quickest to sell out Ukraine. Listen to what J.D. Vance was saying today, as, mind you, this is as we're getting stories about the Russians giving intelligence assets to the Iranians, giving them assistance with their drone program, at the same time that they're getting sanctions relief. But the war is continuing. In fact, the war is intensifying. And Lavrov is very clearly in diplomatic settings speaking against the American operation, saying that he will always be there for the Iranians to assist them in helping them with resistance. I don't know what they think that means. But at the same time, while there's two objectives being pushed one way and the other way. JD Vance's concern is commerce. Commerce. Where do we have that statement? Here it is. Commerce. Commerce. Commerce.
So there's been a lot of debate about what exactly our foreign policy should be with regards to Russia and Ukraine. The President of the United States has been very clear. He wants the killing to stop. He wants to get back to commerce. He wants to stop the innocent people who are losing their lives in that conflict. I happen to admire that. Of course, I'm biased, but I think that's the right idea.
So what's the plan after? What's the plan after when the Trump administration, if the Trump administration says, look, it is enough of a security risk that we have to take out of the atomic weapons program of Iran, we have to do X, Y, and Z. You can disagree, agree, I don't care. There has to be a plan for what you do after that. And the plan cannot be, in order to pursue this one objective, we're going to sell out every single other American national security priority, American ally, crank up oil prices, help the Russians drag on the war for years after you said 24 hours. 24 hours. You have to figure something out here, because if you don't, it looks like you're screwing over the Gulf states. It looks like you're screwing over global oil supply. And in order to get back on the good horse of the people's favor, the first people you sell out are the Ukrainians. And do you sell them out to effect? No, you sell them out to no effect. The markets have not reacted. The only thing that has reacted is the Russian coffers. The only thing that's reacted is the Russian coffers. They're going to make more money, but the markets haven't reacted to the supply increase. Barely reacted to us releasing the 172 million.